Hello everybody. First of all, sorry for delay. It's hot day and very active and hectic day in Glasgow, but this is fantastic event. It's named rather dry. Driving climate action with data, the role of the International Methane Emission Observatory. But it's definitely by far more and more colorful compared with this drive mentioning driving with data. Data are important, but people definitely are the most important part of it. This event, in a way, is also part of the EU Energy Day, but again, we should not be misled because methane emissions are not only in energy sector, in other sectors as well, and what we talk about, it's about all type of methane emissions. Well, to be correct, it's the same methane, but wherever it is produced. And we have something to celebrate. I came yesterday from European biggest gas conference, and they have been very much emphasizing the point of the agreement on global methane pledge. It's a huge news for industry, very much welcome news, but I believe it's also very strong news for the people that care about 1.5 degrees goal, because that gives this opportunity for us to go. But at the end of the day, you need also to measure, you need also to have a data, really to track what you pledge, have you delivered? And if you have not delivered, why you have not delivered? And I think that's a very, very important moment. And for this, we really have this idea today, in a way, inaugurate the International Methane Emission Observatory. It's actually a bit starting some work, but I am very glad that Inger Andersen, Executive Director of UN Environmental Program, shortly known UNEP, has come here really to tell us about this IMEO, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to you, Andres, it's a pleasure to be here. And of course, the panelists that will speak after me, Rick Duke, thank you. We've met online. It's a pleasure to see you in sort of three-dimensional form. Ilse Appen and Maria Spirati and Stephen Hamburg. It's just a real great pleasure because we do have some quite important news that has already been sort of spoken about, but we want to dive in a little bit deeper. And in a way, you know, because despite what we know about the consequences of letting the planet warm, the world hasn't yet done enough, as we all know, to cut greenhouse gas emissions. We are up against the clock. That's the story that we are speaking to here, and that's why we are calling on action. So we need these fast-acting solutions, and we need all of the solutions in the toolbox, all of them, to bring these deep cuts that we're going for. And the IPCC has clearly said it. The trilogy of emission gap of gap reports that we have issued, production gap, emissions gap, and yesterday with President Alok Sharma of the COP presidency, we issued the adaptation gap. It is very clear we need to step up, right? And so methane, that we all know, everyone has sort of heard the numbers by now, but I will just repeat them in case there's some online person that doesn't quite know. Methane, 84% as potent as CO2, but has a short-lived lifespan, 10, 12 years or so in the atmosphere compared to CO2 that can last for centuries. So, as we know, we need to make that 2030 goal to hit 1.5 degrees. Methane offers us a solution of sorts to help get us there. It is not the end of the story, but it is a helping hand up the cliff face. And we have seen the world taking this increasingly on board. The US, EU-led global methane pledge that we saw just announced, I'm in a time warp, but Tuesday, is a super welcome effort. Over 100 countries are aiming to knock 30% off methane emissions in fuel, agriculture, and waste sectors by 2030. And the fossil fuel industry obviously has the highest potential for these reductions, and frankly, easier than the food sector. And much of it, frankly, at no net cost. So wasted methane can also obviously be captured and used as a natural gas to power homes, etc. We know and understand that methane emission reductions are necessary, and we also know and understand that methane is increasing exponentially since the 1980s. So the methane pledge, putting that hand on promise, is really important. But the fossil fuel industry also needs to know that cutting methane emissions does not give them a free pass to keep polluting for decades to come. It is minimizing damage, but it is not ending it. Spewing carbon into the atmosphere must end, and decarbonization of our energy system is essential. But friends, the International Methane Emission Observatory, IMEO, is designed to help nations and industry meet their commitments. That's what UNEP helps to do often, with partners' support, holding up the evidence of what's actually happening there and holding up that mirror so that we all know in transparent fashion what's happening. The lack of verified data, the lack of emissions data has made it hard to carry out targeted actions at scale and at speed. The IMEO can play a very critical role in making such action easier. An independent and trusted entity, it'll integrate data from diverse sources, company reporting, satellites, scientific studies, national inventories, and that will guide companies and governments as they turn promises into action. In the first year, because we've kind of had a jump start on this, in the first year, IMEO has made some good progress. We just launched, I think 3 days ago, the first annual report of IMEO. Yes, and that showed some movement. Under the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, we refer to it, companies announced their targets, their methane reduction targets. They submitted the first reports and plans on how they would reach those highest levels of reporting on methane, which we refer to as the gold standard, right? To obtain the gold standard, companies must announce an emissions reduction target by 2025. We at UNEP are pushing for a 45% reduction or near zero methane intensity. Of the 55 companies that have set the target, 30 of them meet or exceed the target that we have agreed to set. They haven't met it yet, but they are meeting that target, right? And that is a really good start. But the quality of the data is low, and most companies are not yet able to report with the accuracy that we are looking for. And this is where, of course, the Methane Observatory comes in. Let us also remember that reporting is a means to an end, and that the actual reductions, and that the end is the actual emissions reductions. So companies should strive for that gold standard, setting these ambitious targets, but this needs to happen in parallel with the real meat of mitigation actions. Emissions need to start dropping now, not just once the reporting framework is in place. So I encourage, and we at UNEP encourage, companies to increase that ambition of their initial targets. In methane, these companies have a real chance at getting a start on the right side of history, whilst they're finishing the job of decarbonization. As companies get to work, the IMEO is improving its ability to deliver better support. The IMEO funds methane scientific studies led by academic and research institutions and around the world. These studies are guided by the expertise of IMEO's Scientific Oversight Committee. They're robust, they're independent, and they are publicly available. Satellites are already showing great potential, but the amount of data that they generate creates challenges. This is why IMEO is partnering closely with the European Space Agency's Tromponi, and this is why we are coordinating with the Environmental Defense Fund's MethaneSat and other satellite operators such as Japan's GoSat and Italy's Prisma. Each of these will allow us to get different insights into this challenge. And earlier, just this week, the Canadian government announced its support to GHGSat. That's a commercial provider, and so that it can also provide its data to IMEO. And that is a very welcome development. The integration of all this kind of data with other sources will close that gap, the knowledge gap on methane emissions along the fossil fuel value chain, and it'll help us focus attention and efforts where we can really make a difference. So IMEO is the sort of partner that can put up data in the near-term climate action. And as I said, acting on methane, and I will say this again, is no excuse to prolong the life of fossil fuel industry emissions. Fossil fuel, especially coal, the Secretary General has made it very clear, has to go. And certainly no new coal power plants should be built. But reducing methane emissions is a crucial and necessary step on the path to a cooler climate. I welcome the leadership of the many countries that have signed up to the Global Methane Pledge announced on Tuesday. But we need governments to turn commitments into actual emissions reductions. The International Methane Emissions Observatory will help by catalyzing and accelerating this change and to hold up a mirror of data to the world to secure that low carbon future. For its part, we at UNEP will continue to connect, to partner with, and of course to fund others who are driving change in this space. I very much encourage countries and companies to support IMEO, to join the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, to enhance mitigation targets, and crucially, to deliver on this with urgency. Methane is a critical opportunity to boost climate action, and we need to do this over these next 8 years and beyond. We have this chance. It's within our grasp. We know what to do. We now have data that will help us do it. We can't afford to waste this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Inga, and thank you also for your courage, and you are very welcome to stay, Inga, here still. That people could say not immediately. So the second panel could still wait a second.
My seat was needed.
No, I think it's thank you for your leadership, because it is a risk definitely for an agency to create something new in this world where people are quite skeptical about a lot. So it's congratulations, and the first year has been rather successful. It's promising. But I have another prominent speaker, and I will read your title, Rick. Rick Duke, Senior Director and White House Liaison for the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. In simplified word, but I am old enough to afford myself this liberty. This is a person that hammers out in flesh and blood all the initiatives that his political masters have. So I think it would be more correct. Rick, we are very glad that you are here, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to speak with you today about methane. We're having quite a methane moment here at COP in Glasgow, and that's thanks to the work of many of you here in the audience, both in person and virtually, and certainly to the leadership of UNEP. And thank you, Inger, including for the Global Methane Assessment, a product of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and UNEP earlier this year, that helped to really set the agenda on methane for all of us. And let me just recall a little bit of what that report said about the importance of methane as a core element of the climate crisis solutions that we need. Methane accounts for nearly half of the net warming that we face today, right now. It is a short-lived, potent greenhouse gas, and accordingly, when we move to cut methane pollution, we can get immediate benefits for the climate, and that can give us up to 0.2 degrees centigrade or even 0.3 degrees centigrade of avoided warming by 2050 if we pump the brakes on methane emissions right now. And that is also something that will deliver extraordinary public health and even agricultural productivity benefits, as the Global Methane Assessment outlined, because methane is a key precursor for ground-level ozone formation, which causes adverse impacts on human health, over 200,000 premature deaths annually, and over 20 million tons of lost agricultural productivity. So there are extraordinary benefits in terms of climate, in terms of public health, in terms of agriculture, from acting to cut methane pollution on a global scale. And that is why we are seeing this week, on Tuesday, over 100 countries, 105 on Tuesday and more today. I haven't checked my inbox today, but the list is absolutely growing, of countries that have stepped up and said they will join in an effort to cut methane pollution at least 30% below current levels by 2030. And I should say that is what the Global Methane Assessment says is needed in order to keep a 1.5 degrees centigrade future within reach. We must act with purpose and clarity and in a sustained way to decarbonize the global energy system, of course. And we must similarly act with that purpose and speed in order to cut methane pollution. We have to do both and more if we are to truly keep a 1.5C future within reach. So thankfully, with this Global Methane Pledge launch, and I should say this effort was a joint effort announced initially by President Biden and President von der Leyen on the margins of the Major Economies Forum in September. And we have since seen in less than 2 months a list that was initially under 10 countries supporting at the time of announcement of the effort to this list of now over 105 countries as of today. That includes countries that account for 70% of the global economy and for nearly half of global methane pollution. It includes countries like Brazil, it includes countries like Nigeria, it includes countries like Argentina, and over half of the top emitters of methane now represented. So it is very encouraging in putting this on the agenda where it deserves for leaders to consider in a way that spans the different agencies that have responsibility for, yes, fossil methane emissions, including coal as well as oil and gas methane emissions. Coal, I should say, is the lion's share of the methane emissions in China, for example. So we need to track that as part of our overall fossil methane concerns and opportunities. We also see that agriculture is a huge source of methane emissions, and there are major opportunities to enhance agricultural productivity in a way that reduces methane emissions while benefiting rural economies. And then, of course, the waste sector is a key part of the solution for cutting methane pollution as well. So we need methane to be at a leader level of priority because it spans multiple ministries in every government, and because it has a similar importance to energy sector decarbonization in keeping 1.5C within reach. And thankfully, we're seeing that come together this week in Glasgow. And again, I thank UNEP for the partnership on this, and I thank many of you here in the audience and online for everything that you're doing to keep this momentum going. So with respect to IMEO, with respect to the acronym I'm not yet sure how to pronounce, we are thrilled to be announcing today that the United States will join and support IMEO. We stand ready with the agencies in the United States government to commit in-kind support in particular, which in many ways is the most important contribution that we can make. We will also be making direct contributions, but we will be engaging in a serious way on the work of IMEO, including the technical work to assess the data that are coming in increasingly from remote sensing operations, satellite and overflight and in situ, and make sure that we as a global community have the sharpest possible picture of what is happening, starting with the fossil sector, including coal, oil, and gas, but then expanding as the data permit into these other more challenging to track sectors. And we are going to be committed as a partner in IMEO to ensuring that as we do that work with IMEO, we bolster the existing Paris Agreement structure, the existing national inventories, while we then also provide that company level and ultimately facility level granularity, including through efforts like Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. So we'll be doing all that work with all of you. We're eager to get our technical agencies engaging on this with the EU and with other partners in IMEO. And we think that this is incredibly important, including to the Global Methane Pledge effort itself. And I should clarify, what we did Tuesday, in the Global Methane Pledge formal launch was merely a start to a process where there will be, of course, a tremendous amount of work to do in coming months on implementation, and then where there will be follow-up methane pledge ministerials annually on the margins of future COPs. That is the only way to get work done in this world. We have to make the pledge then we have to work and then we have to review what we've done. And we will be committed to that effort. And the data that IMEO is going to help us to synthesize and understand and validate and work with will be foundational to all of that effort. And I'll just add one more point, which is that when we've been doing the close-in work with our EU partners to bring these major methane emitters into the Global Methane Pledge, it's sometimes called the M20 or the M30, which is a somewhat different group than the G20. Much overlap, but some distinctions. Every country that is a major methane emitter has grappled very seriously with this question of whether or not to join the Global Methane Pledge, because they know that signaling matters. They know that this kind of a diplomatic commitment matters to their stakeholders, to their agencies, to what they do on climate and what they do with their economic priorities. And so one of the things that we have grappled with in our conversations as we have built this coalition that is still growing is that many countries are very concerned about the data and how good are the data for the different subsectors, how firm is their footing as they think about what they would need to do to contribute to this global goal. So IMEO will be a very welcome and urgently needed contribution to giving countries the confidence they need and the data they need to be able to manage better what we're now measuring better. And so thank you for the work and the partnership, and we're looking forward to a very busy year on methane. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I think that's fantastic news. So you made our day. I think Inger is now happy. Me as well. I am as implementation committee. I could say we have finished our work, or nearly have finished. And I think you mentioned one very important point: credibility and also scientific. And that will we try in the second panel to look on this issue, and also we will hear also from European Parliament, because European Parliament was very instrumental in supporting movement inside the EU. It's not only science, but it's action as well needed, so delivery. So I'm very glad that, both statements have been so strong, so good that, I can't wish better day for myself. And now we will move to the second panel. I will start with Ilse Aben. She will join us online. Ilse is a representative of Scientific Advisory Panel of the UN Climate and Clean Air Coalition. But she is a leading scientist on the gas leaks observed from the space. That's the only area where she is, but that's, I think, is her very strong focus at this stage of the research. Ilse, so the floor is yours. What can we see? What we can do in IMEO that is completely new and challenging?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I apologize for not being in Glasgow. I also would like to thank the previous speakers for their very stimulating words. That's really very encouraging. And indeed, I want to speak about, my background is as a researcher, and I am an expert in satellite remote sensing of greenhouse gases with focus on methane. And so I'm knowledgeable on how you detect methane using satellite observations and how you then quantify the emissions based on these observations. Up front, I should say that satellite measurements of methane should be considered complementary to other means to measure methane in the atmosphere, of course, from the ground, aircraft, or other platforms. But the big advantage of using satellites is their unique character of being able to measure globally with the same instrument almost everywhere. And so you can measure in remote and challenging locations, which otherwise might not be possible by other means. So that's the strength of the satellites. And as already alluded on, we have seen quite some major developments the past few years in satellite observations of methane. And I'm also the co-principal investigator of the TROPOMI satellite instrument, which is operational since 2018 and launched by the European Space Agency. And TROPOMI measures many species, including methane. And it has proven to be a real game changer. And how can that be? So why is that? And that's because it observes the whole Earth in one day, while individual observations look at an area of only 5 by 7 square kilometers. So let's say at city scale. So we're looking at roughly 20 million methane observations a day. Okay, we have to filter out the cloudy ones, but still. And the next day, we have another 20 million methane observations. And with this, we now can, for the first time, monitor methane emission around the world every single day. And these emissions can come from very localized point sources. So, for example, from flaring installations that are actually not flaring, but continuously venting. We've seen that. But also from area sources, so entire oil and gas fields. Now, the big point sources are the most obvious methane signals we see in tropomi, which we refer to as super emitters. And tropomi now, for the first time, actually shows that there's quite a lot of those on the global scale. However, just using tropomi alone, looking at these individual observations in an area of 5 by 7 square kilometer, in most cases, we cannot pinpoint the exact source responsible for the observed emissions in tropomi. For this, another recent development is important to mention. It was, again, already alluded on by the earlier speakers, namely satellite measurements that measure methane at very high spatial resolution, in the order of, say, 20 meters, and capable of measuring methane at facility scale level. So currently, there's only one. There's 3 satellites out there from one company, the commercial company GGSat that was referred to earlier, that can actually do that. But more, also public satellites are planned for the near future. Well, in fact, existing satellites, originally not meant to measure methane, are now starting to be utilized as well for detecting the largest methane leaks. And these are really very exciting new developments that can be used here. Now, these high spatial resolution satellites, they have limited spatial coverage. So they need to know where to look. And what we have shown is that one can use tropomi to provide that information. So tropomi detects on a global scale the super emitters. We provide the rough locations within a few kilometers to those satellites like GGSat, which can then zoom in to determine exactly what facility is leaking these large amounts of methane. And this is an extremely powerful tool. In this way, we were able to determine sources of large emissions coming from coal mine shafts, landfills, and oil and gas infrastructure. Now, what is the meaning of the IMEO? I say IMEO, okay, for a researcher like myself and my colleagues working in this field. So as a researcher, we analyze data. We develop reliable methods, perform studies, and report what we find in peer-reviewed scientific journals. We could stop there, but we have a chance to have real impact here. And we want this very valuable data to be used to take action and to do something about these large emissions we detect. So we have one study, for example, with Spanish colleagues, where we have spotted 24 non-burning flare installations. And that's really heartbreaking. I mean, methane is pouring out at huge quantities, and fixing these types of leaks should not be too complicated. But I realize very well that getting action done is probably the most challenging part of the whole process of getting emissions reduced. So it's clear to me that this is where IMEO will play a crucial role. And here, the stature, the experience and connections of the UN as a convener of IMEO is extremely important, as well as being able to build upon what was referred to already earlier, the oil and gas methane partnership that already includes many oil and gas companies, which is also crucial. In the end, the companies need to take the action. And in that respect, I was also quite impressed by what has been set up already within IMEO, reading the annual report that indeed just came out. So congrats on that. And there are actually 2 final remarks I would like to make based on the satellite observations so far. So I think that super emitters is an important category of sources, in my opinion. It is the low-hanging fruit from the detection and emission perspective. I think on the short term, these could be important to address to make some quick steps. And the second point is that I can only stress the importance of expanding the partnerships to other source sectors like waste and coal mining, as also foreseen by IMEO. We definitely see quite some big emissions in the satellite data coming from these sectors. So there's a lot to be gained there as well, on top of what is coming from the oil and gas sector. Thank you.
And you naturally made the link to politics, and I'm lucky that Maria Spiraki, European Parliament rapporteur on methane, is here. It's not only about satellites that they really care about everything that should be in the legislative process. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like particularly thank Commissioner Simpson for her invitation to this very interesting exchange of views, and saying that we have the European leadership in this regard on reducing methane emissions, and the personal commitment of the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, but also for our Commissioner on Energy on tackling methane emission of Madam Kadri Simpson. And allow me to say that now, after the approach that we have in the European Parliament and after the adoption of the strategy with the vast majority in the plenary of October in Strasbourg, the EU has a coherent and implementable strategy to reduce methane emissions, which is engaging all the relevant sectors, which means that we are engaging energy, agriculture and waste as well. And we have the good news that we have the global methane pledge, which is taking about more than 100 countries, including the US, Japan and Canada, to cut methane emission. According to our opinion, it is a significant step forward to tackling methane emission, and it is also very important that these countries have committed themselves to reduce their overall methane emissions by 30% by 2030 compared with the levels of 2020. The EU's government particularly has published a detailed blueprint of how it intends to methane goal, and it's now time to start working on specific legislative measures in order to proceed with our strategy in regional, national and company level as soon as possible, and engage all the relevant sectors. The methane regulatory measures should strive to achieve significant emission reduction swiftly and cost-effective as possible, and provide incentives and support companies to achieve performance standards in an optimal manner. And it is also important to face the difficulties, because we have a lot of difficulties in order to implement our strategy. The number one issue we have to address is the collection of reliable data from all relevant sectors, starting from the energy sector. Even though the voluntary pledge is backed by 15 of the world's biggest methane emitters, including, of course, us, the EU, and Indonesia and Iraq, some of the most vital countries to the methane effort have not indicated their support to this pledge, namely China, Russia, India and Australia. Obviously, the number one issue, according to our opinion, is the lack of political will. And it is a lack of political will of key emitters to get on board, and the lack of data which is following their reluctance. That's why we have to support the establishment of the Independent International Methane Emission Observatory, in partnership, of course, with the UN Nations Environmental Programme and the Climate Clean Air Coalition, and also the International Energy Agency, tasked to collecting, reconciling, verifying, and publishing anthropogenic methane emissions data at a global level. This observatory should be followed by developing a methane supply index. We have to spearhead this initiative, including by mobilizing funding, which is essential in order to have a pragmatic approach. Independent, comparable, verifiable and transparent emissions data are key to gain knowledge about the size of the emission problems and to combat underestimation of the size and amount of leaks. Such an observatory should look at methane emissions across all relevant sectors. Availability of the detailed emissions data should lead our governments and regulators being able to enforce the polluter pays principle. And to support such an observatory, we need mandatory, strong, independent and significantly rigorous monitoring, reporting and verification system. It is the so-called MRV. It is necessary to provide credible data, to identify issue and efficient measures, and to assess the progress achieved. A mandatory MRV system should also improve member state performance, reporting to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In addition, we need a strong leak detection and repair program. It is a critical element for our strategy to reduce methane emission. Until now, we have some kind of sporadic efforts. I would like just to mention specifically the Clean Air Task Force effort, which recently documented methane leaks over 100 sites across the EU. Thanks to the technologies, we have data. And of course, such kind of methodologies are giving us the real picture of different countries. For example, in the Russian Federation, leaks from gas transmission pipelines were so substantial that they were recently dedicated from space. So, in this regard, the Copernicus programs we have available in the EU and its atmosphere monitoring service will play a key role in detecting and monitoring global super emitters as well as smaller scale sources. Aerial monitoring is equally key in targeting venting, flaring and leak detection. Satellite data allows independent verification of a company's footprint and facilitate engagement on mitigation. The sharing of information, according to my opinion, is the key, of course, in order to have the public opinion to put some pressure for having adoption in this regard. And technologies among stakeholders is very important in the European Union and also at the global level. I insist that information should be shared with the public in order to act as a catalyst for abandonment efforts. In our report in the European Parliament, we are asking for binding global agreement to reduce methane emission. However, if it's not possible to achieve that tomorrow, we have to proceed with bilateral agreements on MRV and LDAR with the countries exporting fossil fuels to the EU. In addition, we have to proceed with mitigation of methane from all mines, including for closed and abandoned sites. A mandatory MRV and LDAR for coal mine methane emission is crucial, including the requirement for companies that own closed sites or the member states when it comes to abandoned mines where no existing owner is liable. It is also important to adopt the same MRV and LDAR measures for operating sites and not only for abandoned mines. We have to adapt measures equipped in standards and impose a measuring requirement for all mines. I would like to conclude with saying a few words concerning the agriculture and the waste management sector. We face there a huge lack of data. At the same time, a lot of best practices could provide low-cost and technically feasible methane mitigations. According to my opinion, there is no excuse to slow down because we are lacking of data in these two sectors. The key for all sectors, starting with the energy sector, is, according to my approach, the performance-based regulation and economic instruments. This is the key. And we have a lot of best practices in order to adapt. Just let me give you two examples which my team has already selected. For example, in Canada, Alberta's Directive 060 has performance-based and economic provisions designed to reduce flaring and venting from pipelines and gas plants. In the United States, Massachusetts introduced a performance-based regulation that encourages natural gas distributions to upgrade their pipeline infrastructure with newer materials by setting company-specific emission caps and decline over time. In Germany, there is also the ordinance on high-pressure gas pipelines operators. They are required to take protective measures to avoid leaks, monitor operating pressures, and maintain on all call service to respond malfunction. By saying this, I would like to conclude that the important is to put our money where our greatest emissions are if we are to achieve our ambitious goal. We have now our MFF, we have the lending policy of EIB and also the investment policy of EIB, which has already allocated more than 85 million euros in financing projects that have direct impact on methane emission mitigation. We have also the contribution coming from EBRD. It is time to act now. By reducing methane emissions, we can get a quick win for protecting our people, for protecting the environment. And let's start to change the game. We can do it. Thank you very much.
Well, I think well merited applause because really we are celebrating the launching IMEO, so I think it's really kind and good statement. So I would like to conclude the panel with my colleague on the implementation committee, Steve Hamburg. But Steve has other functions as well. But for me, the most important that he somehow managed to keep the scientific potential not conflicting inside the methane scientist community. Yes, there are different approaches, different ideas, and it's normal scientific community, but we are proud that we could manage to establish scientific oversight committee from different regions, different backgrounds, and it is thanks to Steve. Steve, I would like that you conclude this part of our today's discussion.
Thanks, Andres. So I want to build off of, wait till I get here, build off of what everyone's already said, because much of what I was going to say, the other speakers have said. We certainly concur that we need high quality data that makes a clear picture of what's being emitted, where it's being emitted, and how much is being emitted, and how much is it changing over time. That's the mission of IMEO, and to do that, we need to begin to really integrate data from all different kinds. And we heard descriptions from Ilse about the different types of satellites, the discussion that Rick had about making sure that we understand how it fits with inventories. So we need to think across these different sectors. And what IMEO is planning to do, has already started to do, is to build an integration platform to bring 4 major types of data together. It's going to bring together the data that we've heard about from the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. That's voluntary reporting of more than 70 companies representing more than 1/3 of global production at the facility level. And as they aspire to get under OGMP 2.0, ever better data, those data will be integrated and looked at along with other data sets, including direct measurement studies, which have been going on up till now through the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, international methane studies that IMEO will continue. So sending scientists from dozens and dozens of institutions across the globe to go out and make measurements directly, whether that be on the ground or from the air with drones, a whole host of different methods, both in the urban environment and in oil and gas infrastructure from coal. In addition, Ilse described all of the different remote sensing technologies. The target mode, the GHGSat data that will be brought in, the super emitter data that Kairos is contributing from the Tripoli stream, the Tripoli data, and then as new satellites, the one I'm involved with directly, MethaneSat or Carbon Mapper, bringing in Prisma. There's a series of these. But the key is right now, there is no mechanism for integrating all these data streams, plus the inventories, so that one has a portal to understand how they fit together, and where there are tensions, where there are inconsistencies, we're addressing them. We're understanding them. How much uncertainty? And I really believe this is the beginning of a revolution for greenhouse gases. This is the first time that we're collectively coming together saying we're going to bring all the data together to create an impartial, unified view of what we know and where we have uncertainty. That becomes the basis that Maria talked about for the action we need. Because without it, we end up arguing. And we've seen a real, as Andres implied, bringing together of so much of the scientific community, coming together, hundreds and hundreds of scientists already, and more to come, across all the continents. Maybe we don't have anybody from Antarctica, but everywhere else we have them, working together to deploy different methods, different approaches, but within the unified mission of getting the best quality data in ways that can be integrated. And that we are going to commit ourselves in IMEO to do. We've started doing, and I think there's enormous enthusiasm within the larger scientific community to continue that. We're starting with fossil fuel, with oil and gas and coal, but again, we have to continue that and bring that out across the sources, whether that's landfills or agriculture. But we can take what we do in the fossil fuel sector and build on that in the other sectors, and that will happen quickly. I think we have a bold goal, but the scientific community is up to it. I think we've demonstrated over the last few years that this is not a reach. It will be a lot to do, but it's very doable, and we will have the best greenhouse gas emissions data and understanding, period. and very much look forward to working with anybody here in the room and in the audience to integrate these data. This is a contribution from everyone. Everything will be transparent, and we hope that it will make a lot of difference in allowing those who are responsible for action at all levels, whether it's the private sector or government, civil society, to be able to act much more effectively and much more quickly. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm happy and proud that concluding remarks for this remarkable event will be provided by Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson. We have advanced a lot, and we have advanced because of her political courage and anticipation, because when she decided to support establishment of IMEO, well, we did not know where exactly it will lead. Global Meta Pledge was still far away, so we have still a lot of run, and today we are in, I would say, privileged situation because we have Scientific Oversight Committee. IMEO is basically running, it could be wrapped up. So we have achieved quite a lot in this, but it's a lot of thank you, Commissioner Simpson. And for concluding remarks, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the EU Energy Day. So throughout this day, we have discussed key issues we face in energy transition, and methane definitely plays an important role in this discussion. So I am delighted to see how much interest this topic attracts. And there is a valid reason for that. As you have heard today, methane is a potent greenhouse gas, and there is no doubt we need to urgently reduce the emissions it creates. To complement the action on carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. I would like to thank all distinguished panelists for the contribution in today's debate and for your thoughts and insights. And I think that the high level of speakers in this room is further proof that methane emissions have become a serious political topic. I would also like to thank Andris Piibalks for vigorously leading this discussion, and Florence School of Regulation has been a very good partner for us. There is a broad consensus that the short atmospheric lifetime of methane means that taking action now can rapidly reduce the rate of global warming. Readily available, cost-effective methane emission measures have the potential to avoid over 2.0 degrees, avoid 0.2 degrees Celsius of warming by 2050. And not only that, the same measures would bring other benefits, improving people's health and increasing productivity in agriculture. Rapidly reducing methane emissions is the single most effective strategy to reduce global warming in the near term and keep the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And it is possibly the only low-hanging fruit left in our fight against climate change. To pick that fruit, the European Union, together with the international community, must take a number of specific actions. And the Commission and the European Union were the first to put the methane issue on the international and, of course, domestic policy agenda. This happened already 3 decades ago. So the European Commission strategy, adopted in 1996, helped reduce methane emissions from landfilling by almost a half. Under the European Green Deal, the European Union adopted in October last year a strategy to reduce methane emissions in all key sectors, like Maria already mentioned, covering also energy, but of course agriculture and waste too. And the reduction of methane emissions in the current decade is an important part of the EU's ambition to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, and of course it is necessary to achieve our climate neutrality target. Starting in the EU in December, the European Commission will propose legislation to ban venting and flaring, put in place requirements to detect leaks and repair them, and make measuring, reporting and verification of methane emissions mandatory for companies. The legislation will also increase the transparency of how those who import energy to the EU address methane emissions. This will allow the buyer in the EU to make more informed choices. Fortunately, the EU is not alone in taking the issue of methane seriously. The launch of the Global Methane Pledge by leaders 3 days ago was actually a great success. Over 100 countries joined the pledge and committed to committed a collective goal of reducing global methane emissions by at least 30%. And they all committed to move towards using best available inventory methodologies to quantify methane emissions with a particular focus on high emission sources. As was highlighted today, the International Methane Emissions Observatory is crucial for these efforts to be successful. When looking at the wider global dimension, a reliable and transparent overview of methane emissions is still patchy. And current system for collecting and reconciling methane data do not tell us precisely enough where emissions happen and in what volumes. This is why European Commission has been supporting also financially the United Nations Environmental Programme in establishing an independent international methane emissions observatory. This will address the global data gap and improve transparency in this area. The International Methane Emissions Observatory will cooperate closely with other existing initiatives that focus on some aspects of methane, such as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. It will collaborate with states, business communities, civil society, and academia. I believe that the International Methane Emissions Observatory, anchored in the United Nations system, is uniquely placed to create a sound and independent scientific basis for methane emissions calculations and reductions. No other organization can fill that role as effectively. If we want real measurable action to reduce methane emissions, then we need international support for the observatory. A good start has been made with the new oil and gas methane partnership, which will significantly improve methane measurement, reporting and verification capability in the energy sector. OGMP data will provide one of the main data streams in IMO. So I invite and encourage every country to join and support the International Methane Emissions Observatory as soon as possible. Because this kind of support will help to make the observatory a success and win one important battle in our joint fight against climate change. And on final note, I would like to warmly thank Inger Anders and the whole UNEP team for great cooperation in making IMO as well OGMP 2.0 a reality. The European Union will continue to stand with you and support your crucial work. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated in today's event.
Well, with these Commissioner's words, I would like to conclude, but I will just remind the main issues. We discussed broad aspects related very closely to Global Methane Pledge. But we heard already the Commission's call for other countries joining has been well heard in the United States. They announced today that they are joining. I expect other countries will do the same. It's not compulsory, but it's collective effort. Collective effort should be dealt collectively. And I am really glad that we have now, I can also confirm, IMO is being launched and will be delivering. So I think that is also some deliverable at the COP26, perhaps not the most, exciting news, but it is crucial to have such a type of initiatives because you need to deliver on credibility and on the actions, not only on the pledges that are definitely important. Thank you for everybody who participated. Thank you, Commissioner, for organizing and hosting us an EU Energy Day framework. And ahead of us is hard work, but it's manageable, it's doable. Thank you very much.